experience, older women tried to mother him, and young mothers were too distracted mothering someone else to make him number one on their list. The third envelope seemed to be sealed with traces of lipstick, which was no bad thing in his book. Sophie Black. She passed the age test and made no reference to kids, or to a husband either, for that matter. She did, however, make a great deal of her excellent personal skills, and she'd made sure to mention how extremely open she was to new ideas. Girls who were extremely open to new ideas interested him a lot, as did girls who sealed their envelopes with a kiss. Despite the fact that Sophie Black didn't allude to her coffee-making skills, he filed her CV on the interview pile anyway. "Kara, I've got an interview for that PA job at Knight, Inc., Sophie whispered into her mobile. She glanced towards the office door where she could see Derek and one of the site foremen engaged in a heated discussion. "No way! That's hilarious!" Kara hissed back, obviously equally as unable to chat, but desperate for the gossip. As soon as the thick cream envelope bearing the Knight Inc. logo had landed on the doormat, next to a ruck of brown bills that morning, Sophie had felt an undeniable fizz of excitement. Dan had glanced up from his newspaper as she'd come back into the kitchen with the mail in her hand. "Anything interesting?" "Not really. Bills, flyers." She dropped it on the work surface. "You know, junk." He'd looked down again before she'd even finished speaking, and for once she'd been glad of his disinterest. "So when is it?" Kara whispered in her ear. "After work on Monday. What should I wear, do you think? A French maid's outfit? Naughty nurse?" Kara's laugh was pure smut down the phone line. "I'm being serious, Kara. They'll be expecting someone cool and sophisticated, and my wardrobe consists of a uniform of deathly dull chain store work suits." "Then you'd better thank your lucky stars you got me," Kara laughed. "I'll come over on Sunday and sort you out." "You're a lifesaver," Sophie said, bolstered by her friend's support. "I'll get the wine in. Dan's away again for 10 days from tomorrow, so we'll have the house to ourselves." "You're on, chick." "Gotta go," Kara mumbled. "Tosser boss is eyeballing me." Several hours later, Sophie tipped a pre-bagged salad into a bowl and splashed a little dressing over it as she placed it in the middle of the dining table. A soft smile touched her lips as she laid a hand against the cool wood. Large and oak, she could well remember the day some years ago when she'd brought Dan a new tie and reenacted Pretty Woman for him when he'd arrived home. He'd loosened his tie at the sight of her in just stilettos and his gift, and they'd christened the dining table, swiftly followed by the stairs. Thinking back now, Sophie could barely believe it had ever happened. Who were those people? Dan had swept her off her feet from the first moment she met him, and when he proposed to her on her 21st birthday, she hadn't needed to think twice. Sure, they were young, but they were in love, and any attempts at guidance from their families fell on stony ground. And for the most part, it worked. Wasn't it true for all long-term relationships that the excitement slows down once the first flush of lust fades away? Sophie had read enough magazine articles to know that she was in the majority when it came to having a love life that was more about routine than spontaneous sex on the dining table. And if truth be told, it probably wasn't all Dan's fault. Sophie knew she could just as easily be the one to instigate something. But what? And when? Dan was away so much that he could officially be classed as a part-time husband, if such a role existed, which by default made Sophie a part-time wife. The thought unsettled her, and she still had a frown on her face when Dan came through the door a few moments later. "All right, babe." He dropped a kiss on her forehead.